Man, the robot sound gets me every time. Chris Dickey, welcome to the show.
Thanks
How's it
for having
going?
me. Great, great. How about you?
I'm doing well. Yeah, I'm excited to bring you on the show because a lot of people don't know this, and I think it's kind of interesting. There's so many really good euphonium players from like central Illinois.
Hmm.
It's it's so nuts.
Yeah. Or you make contact with someone and you're like, I don't recognize that little town that you're from. It's Central Illinois. It explains it all. Comes together.
Yeah,
Yep.
Mark Carlson and Brian Meixner are both soft yeses for the show
Uh-huh.
over the next couple of weeks, and I'm really excited. It's gonna be I'm gonna have like a little powwow of all of us. It's gonna be great.
Yeah.
I'm really stoked. Cool. So, for folks that don't know who you are, can you share a bit about your background?
Sure. Yes, I'm originally from Southern Illinois, actually, outside the St. Louis area,
Oh, nice.
and did a little bit of growing up in Central Illinois too, outside Springfield. I started on euphonium, and I don't have one of those special stories about oh, the first time I heard euphonium, it was like a chorus of angels. I don't have that. It was just I have one older brother who was already playing clarinet in the junior high band, and I went to one of his concerts. And I saw his friend Zach in the back row playing the euphonium. I didn't know what it was, and I just said, "Yeah, Tom, what was that thing that your friend Zach played?" He said, "Oh, I think it's a euphonium." And so, like the next week, I went to the elementary band director and um, said, "Hi, I'm Chris Dickey. I'd like to play the euphonium." And he was like, "What? What? Oh, okay." And so I didn't realize that was unusual, and then I started to realize, oh, I'm like the only one. Okay, so whatever. Yeah, did a lot of euphonium playing for a while. Went away to college to major in music at Eastern Illinois University. I was a music ed major for a good long while, and then when I started thinking about going to graduate school, I noticed the cycle of funding, kind of like what we were talking about beforehand.
Yes.
It would leave me out if I completed the semester of student teaching. So I actually dropped the teacher certification. Uh,
Whoa.
yeah, I did, and I finished with the BM in performance in 2007. Yeah, and then I went to the University of Iowa. I was a studio GA there.
Oh, cool. Did you stay with
Graduated.
John?
Yeah, stayed with John,
Oh, nice.
and it was actually with John where he had one of those serious talks with me. He's like, "Oh, since you want to go, you know, teach in higher ed, you really do need to start doing some doubling,
Yeah.
some tuba." And so I actually started playing E flat tuba first.
Oh, nice. Why
Yeah,
E flat?
they had an extra
Oh,
uh,
cool.
Wilson something or other. I'm
Mm,
not equipment savvy, but it was really nice, and so I started playing
cool.
that. Graduated from there, went over to Northwestern to study with Rex Martin, and started doing more and more of the tuba and euphonium thing
What
there.
was it like studying with Rex Martin? I've heard he's so intense and but also incredible.
Yeah, well, I mean, we always got along like really
Yeah.
well. He's very serious but not severe, if that makes
Mm,
sense. Like he is there to teach you, and we are going to go, and we are going to do the thing, and here we are. Let's go, let's go. It was perfect for me at that time because I had gone all the way through my degrees, and I just felt like the way he was able to push me was exactly what I needed when I was um, doing a doctoral degree. Whereas I don't know if I would have gotten as much out of him if I studied with him for like an undergrad, for example. But he was
yeah.
perfect for me. I always felt like all of my teachers were perfect for me at the time that I had them. So
That's awesome.
I think that was lovely. Um, and then I got my job at WSU. I was tired of being a student, in full disclosure, because I went straight through
Yeah.
degrees, and I was like, I'm either going to be in Evanston and teaching a whole lot more students. I had always been teaching, you
Hmm.
know, I had a private studio of my own at various high schools and whatnot. And I was like, well, Chris, you're either going to move in with your oboe friend Jonathan in Evanston or northern Chicago and take on more students, or you're going to apply for everything under the sun.
Yeah.
And uh, I interviewed for two places, heard back from WSU first, and was like, "Where may I sign?" So then
Cool.
and
Yeah.
I had never been further west than like Kansas, and I remember being in
Whoa.
Illinois. You might feel something similar because you're from Illinois. Like what's in Idaho? What people live
Yeah,
in
I've
Montana
wondered a
and
little bit about
Washington?
some of the rural Northwest because that's not someplace I've been, but I've had the immense privilege of seeing a lot of the United States. My dad is a retired recreation therapist and he used to teach recreation therapy at Western Illinois University, and
Mm,
so much of his field work is was intertwined with the National Park Service. And so
yeah.
like I've I've been blessed to be a lot of wonderful places and see like some of the natural wonders of this world. Like Yosemite National Park is the most beautiful place I've ever been. Hard to convince me there's a more beautiful place than that. It's magic. It's magical. And it's like otherworldly. When we went to Sequoia National Park, like the idea that a tree could be like 20 yards in diameter and I'm like there's a forest of them. It's
Yeah.
not, and like the tallest tree in Redwood National Park is so far in the forest. You have to be like a seasoned real backpacker in order to get there. It's like an 18-hour hike or something. It's
Hmm.
nuts. So yeah, I mean, I'd love to explore more out west. It's just something I haven't gotten to yet.
Yeah, and it is really beautiful out here. I'm not really like a hiker or anything like that. I always tell people I like to look at nature from behind glass. Um, but I mean, it's a really beautiful place to live. The people are genuinely kind.
Yeah.
Um, and I mean, this is my 12th year out here,
That's
so
awesome. You could go
and
on a
my husband,
helicopter ride. That's not
yes,
necessarily glass, but that would be
yeah,
really cool to be able to like see flying overlooks of stuff. That'd be so cool.
oh yeah. Um, and yeah, I met my husband out here. That's been great.
It's
And
awesome.
the longer we're here, just expanding our network and kind of related to what you were probably going after, like music wise. In the job, I started playing, a lot more tuba just because of the demand of the job. Got
Oh
to play,
yeah.
got to play it in the brass quintet. Always played tuba on recitals. I started playing more and more C tuba because I play in a couple regional orchestras out here. So
Yeah.
um, I mean, when it's busy, it is busy. And, sometimes I have to, oh, I can't do that one because that'll be like 4 weeks in a row. I'd like to,
Do you
like,
find gigging a lot of regional orchestras is just as, if not more fun than like having a singular orchestral job?
oh, that's a good question. This might sound heretical. I don't know. But I never really wanted to pursue full time orchestral tuba playing.
That's fine. I mean, but
Um,
you should do whatever you want. I
I
was
just
just curious because, like,
never
it
did.
it strikes me as like I think some for some folks like having some variety to life can be really really helpful,
Hmm.
and so like I love the idea of being able to play some regional orchestra stuff because that way you can scratch the itch without necessarily doing it like 1000% of the time.
Oh, absolutely. Or just back in January, we one of the orchestras I play in did Brahms 2, and I was like,
Yeah,
"Oh, I've never played Brahms 2," and I had a whole lot going on work
yeah,
wise and lots of stuff, and it was just like, so good for the soul. So
yeah.
you hit the
That's
nail on the head
cool.
that those types of performance opportunities are always supplemental, and
Yeah.
they just fill my cup. They tend to come at just the right time, and I find it uh, really balances out everything that I'm doing, and
So
it
this
keeps me
begs the
going.
question, if like the planets comes up for a regional orchestra gig, do you play tuba or euphonium?
Funny you should have. I've played the planets on Euphonium out here like uh, 3 or 4 times,
Oh,
and
nice.
I might be one of the few euphonium players out there who has played Ein Heldenleben like 5 or 6 times in their career.
Whoa. Oh my
Yeah, like
gosh.
yeah, there was
So
this
so
period
really what
where
you
everyone did
should be
it.
billing yourself as is Chris Dickey orchestral euphonium player.
There you go. I'll give it a rebrand. But I remember taking inventory of this once, actually, when I was doing my annual review, and I was like, wait a minute, that's like the fourth or fifth time I played that.
That's
Holy crap!
awesome.
What?
That's so cool.
And yeah, I didn't think about it whenever I signed up for the gig, but it was just, yeah, I'm available for then. Cool, I'll see you there. And
That's sick.
yeah,
That's
I'm
so
Hildenberg.
cool.
Yeah, yeah.
What chamber music do you like to play?
Um, I really like brass quintet. That's really rewarding. But actually, something I've been really nerding out on lately is horn, tuba, and piano trio.
Yes. Oh my gosh. I've written one of those. It's nuts. It's such a
So
fun
good.
medium.
Yeah, and like the timbres complement each other. so nicely, but the horn can do its own thing while, the tuba, I'm usually doing F tuba in that
Hmm.
context, is its own beast as well. And just the way that
Yeah.
they blend together can be really, really
Yeah,
satisfying. So
it's a fun
been doing
medium.
a lot of that. Yeah,
One
been
of
doing a lot of
the big pieces I wrote when I think it was going into the spring semester of my senior year of undergrad was
that.
like this opener for the CTP trio, horn, tuba, and piano. The CTP stands for Christine, Patty, and Tim, which are the members of the ensemble. And it was really funny. So Christine and Tim are a couple, and then Patty was this incredible collaborative pianist who was working at Illinois State. She's the secretary for the psychology department, but like like nails
Hmm.
musician, like her. It's hard to explain like just how incredible a pianist that Patty was. I mean, she worked so hard. It was incredible. She was like always burning the midnight oil because she accompanied all of the best students in the School of Music.
Okay.
And like the concerto competition finals was like Patty's collaborative piano recital every year.
Oh
It
yeah,
was
on full
incredible.
display.
And all of the judges would come over and be like, "Well, Patty, really, we should be honoring you instead of all. I mean, like your students are great, but like you played for everybody."
Yeah,
Like
that's
and
wonderful.
dominated at the piano. Like this is incredible. Um, and then Tim, at the time when I was writing this piece, Tim was my boss and Christine was my academic advisor. So it was like, oh, this is like, and Patty had been my accompanist for all of undergrad. So I was like, wow, what a personal and intimate ensemble to write for. And then like being able to work with all of these really cool timbral changes and stuff. It's a really interesting piece. But so it's this wacky concert fanfare that takes this kind of nice melody and just like shoots it all over the place, stretches it, compresses it, does all kinds of wild stuff. It's a really silly piece, but it's fun.
Well, I'll need to get that from you because we call ourselves the Anonim Trio. That's our name. We're always looking for new rep, and
That's awesome.
we might do try to get some grant funding to commission some new
Cool. Yeah, I'll
music,
send it your way.
all that
It'll be
type of
fun.
stuff. So we're always on the hunt for new things. We've got an album coming out here like any day now
Oh,
of
sweet. That's awesome.
of some
I didn't
new
realize
some
this
new
was
stuff.
going to be the album drop presser.
Oh, accidentally. Yeah, it's been sent off to the record label, and I
That's
just
sweet.
predict one day I'm going to open my computer and be like, ta-da, here it is. So
That's awesome. I'm
we'll
dropping
find
an
out.
album later this semester. I'm doing a live album. It's an experimental live improvised set
Hmm?
with one of the ensembles that I play here and some extra friends. It's gonna be
Okay,
nuts. We're
love
playing
it.
this like big painting graphic score that I made last year. It's really wacky and it's all like the glyphs on the painting are all based on like elements of chakras and Hindu mythology and like
Okay.
it's like trying to be a very like spiritual piece. I did a lot of yoga in 2020 and I really started trying to understand and connect to that kind of spiritual energy. So my teacher is really into that stuff.
Cool.
And so like this piece is kind of trying to distill the journey that I went on in that year. It's kind of cool.
That's fun. That
Yeah,
sounds
it's
great.
wacky and interesting because like like walking into it, I'm sure there are people who are gonna be like, "How do you play a painting?" But
Sure.
as soon as because the core of the ensemble is the experimental improvised group that I play with here at Illinois, like as soon as we start, they'll be like, "Oh, we got it."
Hmm.
It makes
Oh, this all
sense.
makes sense. Okay. Okay.
Yeah,
Love
it's kind
that.
of fun. So that's that. The quintet that you play in, what kind of rep do y'all do?
Um, oh, that's a good question. Well, so it's the faculty quintet
Hmm.
here at WSU, and I it's like so we're mainly playing for our students on campus, and then we
Yeah.
go out and visit area high schools. So with that in mind, using it as a recruitment tool, I don't think we can do. I would hesitate to do anything too avant-garde.
Mhm.
We play a blend of the classics. Like, sure, let's do Ewald
Yeah.
3. Okay, great. Let's do Ewald 1. Blah blah blah. Cheatham stuff. We played a really cool Lauren Bernofsky um, quintet right before COVID. But what actually what we've been doing more and more, I'm reminded, is we had this second trumpet player who's a regional player, and throughout the pandemic, she decided to take a career shift, and she's becoming a nurse. So
Whoa.
we were without this second trumpet for a while, and my trumpet colleague actually found these brass quartets by William Ramso. I'd I'd never heard
What's
of
somebody
them.
I heard
They're
of?
these four multi-movement brass quartets for unusual instruments. On the spot, I'm gonna think it was like B flat trumpet, F alto trumpet or something,
Hmm.
some other weird trombone, and then tuba. And so he
Huh.
reworked it and changed the keys, and they work really well. So
That's
we've actually been
awesome.
doing that. We just played a recital on Friday actually,
Oh, sweet.
featuring the first one. So I don't know. I'm really open to playing pretty much anything.
Yeah.
Um, and I just love to play chamber music. I always felt like I improved so much as a player when I really hunkered down and dove into chamber
Yeah.
music. So it's
Chamber
it's
music
like
stretches you like
all the
nothing
things.
else. I played with a
Mhm.
quintet when I was living in Minnesota, and one of the things I hadn't really appreciated as much, because I played with a quartet a little bit when I was in undergrad, but like, I mean, playing chamber music, you have to do all of the solo level preparation and all of the ensemble work at the same time. So it's just like
Mhm.
so brutal for your brain, but it's also like incredible for your musicianship because you have to be so
Well,
responsible.
absolutely. And the other group I play a lot in, and we're trying to get back into the swing of things where we are in the pandemic, is the Motus Tuba Quartet, and that stuff is intense because we all live in different parts of the country. So when we do
Yeah.
assemble, it's like on
Yeah.
go, and like the expectations of consistency and whatnot. And then we get into the recording studio, time
Don't
of
you
prep.
almost think that's like a almost a better chamber music environment? I mean, like obviously a group that you play with pretty regularly has got to be pretty special because it can be kind of your way to decompress, but like,
Yeah.
oh man, I think having the contrast would be so interesting because then you really have to be good.
Hmm.
You really
It's
have to be good.
and I mean it's intense, but it ends up being fine because you're doing that level of intense work with people you love and you love to play with. So
Yeah.
it's all a wash in the end.
Well,
It's
and
a
I imagine
positive.
like because the intensity is fairly short, it prevents people from burning out and getting frustrated at each other.
Mhm.
Which is like I remember I think it's Andrew Hitz on the Brass Junkies one time saying like if you've ever imagined like why or if you've ever thought about why your favorite band broke up, it's because they suddenly all realized they hated each other. And I was like, that makes me sad. I don't want to think about that.
Who knows? Yeah, I'm not sure.
Yeah.
Um, but I don't know. I just love chamber music, and I think about
Yeah.
all that it did for me, all that I see it do for students,
Oh yeah.
and it's like I'm always singing its praises, even whenever I'm
And
talking to them.
what you can do for
Schools.
composers with it too. I mean, like, especially if like you want to champion young composers, like small solos and chamber music are so efficient to get them to write a lot of music because it's not always a huge commitment. As well, I mean, it is creatively, but like as far as the administrative side of stuff, in terms of like if you want to get a consortium together, like especially for like a student that's in like their master's degree, $1,000 makes so much of a difference for them. And if it's just as something as simple as like we want a brass quintet that's 4 or 5 minutes, like
Mhm.
it's like all they have to do is the creative side because engraving the score and getting the parts like formatted pretty well is like pretty easy with a group
Yeah.
that little. It's
Oh,
not like a
absolutely.
70 part orchestra score.
Well, and those types of projects. Yeah, I mean, there you hit the nail on the head. There is a reason why younger and up and coming composers aren't writing works for full symphony orchestra because they won't get played.
Yeah.
So if they're a bit more strategic about what the
Hmm.
instrumentation is, it can really help them launch.
Yeah, well, and, to be honest, I find it's pretty interesting, and it also depends on the department. But like, there are a lot of like composition faculty who don't encourage their students to write for band, and bands looking for new music all the time.
Yeah, well, I think that speaks to some snobbery that exists
Yeah,
in academia and
I think they don't know how to
band,
handle the medium.
oh
I have
band.
my really hot take is I don't think they know how to handle the medium
Mhm.
because like so here at Illinois, we played this symphony for band earlier this year by a very famous orchestral composer, and the I mean, and it's an incredible piece of music. He's an incredible composer, but
Mm,
one of the things that I came away with it was like, oh, like this is his first piece for band. Like I can tell it's his first piece for band. And then I looked it up and it was his first piece for band. And it's like, okay, this is really interesting, which started to inform this idea of, well, and then I encountered a concerto transcription actually for Euphonium and orchestra from Euphonium and band last year. And one of the things I thought about was like, the band version's so much better. I wonder why that is. And I
mhm,
spent some time with it. And the theory that I've come up with is um, writing for band and writing for orchestra are obviously both still writing music, but they're fundamentally different mediums. And the orchestra is much more like painting, and the wind ensemble is a lot more like ceramics.
mm,
Because in the orchestra, the strings have to be the canvas that you paint on, or the texture that you add color to, versus the in the wind ensemble you have to build texture and color with the same mass.
mhm.
And I don't think a lot of composers are super comfortable with that. Well, and then this leads to the whole point of this project, which is I've had so many composers look me in the eye and go, including one of my teachers, and go like, I don't know what euphonium is for.
Mhm.
So
Yeah,
like, what do I do? But like writing for saxophone is, I mean, it's so similar to writing for clarinet that they just have to think about, oh, well, the timbre is kind of like this, but like if you can write for clarinet, reasonably you can write for saxophone.
sure. Why not? Yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely. Yeah, and euphonium, it's just one of those things where, um, like just engage. They won't bite. You can
Yeah.
dabble, and you can examine other
Yeah,
strong
I
pillars.
don't think they study the literature because, well, Gail Robertson and I were talking about this. All you would have to do to understand like that the euphonium can kind of do anything is you only need to study Stars and Stripes Forever.
Mm. Oh, that's fair. That's an interesting point.
I
Yeah.
mean, seriously, like if you studied that piece and nothing else, and that might be, I would go so far as to say, I think it's reasonable to say that is the most performed piece of wind ensemble literature, like right now, and maybe ever.
Hmm.
I mean, because
Not it's up there.
every military band closes every concert with it,
Mm.
and then allow community bands play it over the summer. Like this is a reasonable statement to make. But so
Mm.
like, how ironic then that like people are coming in and they're saying like, oh well, I studied like all of these John Mackey pieces, and I studied this and I studied this, and I was like, well, that's not. I don't know if that's knowing the literature. Like, have you studied the most played piece in the medium?
Yeah. Well, and, and to John Mackey, and to his credit, he's
Yeah.
isn't he the one that like was largely self-taught about how to read
Yeah, and
something?
I find I find John's euphonium parts to be dramatically more thoughtful than a lot of other band composers. Because
I
like he doesn't always ask for some of the technical demands of the instrument, but he knows how to use it as its function of like, oh, I'm going to make these instruments louder because he
Mhm.
understands that it blends with everything. Or if he's like, ooh, I need a brassy solo that's like round and cuts, euphonium immediately,
Yeah.
which I love.
I remember I was away at, playing in some ensemble in New York, and we did Mackey's Red Line Tango.
Oh, nice.
This was like 2005, 2006. I think he was just emerging, and I'm fairly certain Red Line Tango was originally for orchestra, and then he did the
Yes,
band version. And I get the euphonium part, and I was like, hmm, I think this might be his first time writing for euphonium. And sure enough, he
that's
came to the
funny.
rehearsal. He's like, yeah, and like for example, I've never written for euphonium before, and I remember being like, mm-hmm, yes. And, he's evolved and changed, and now I
Yeah,
mean, now you can think of all these other works that feature either not. The euphonium doesn't have to be featured prominently, but it needs to be
yeah.
used well and speak to its strengths. So I think that's
Yeah,
happening.
and that's one of the really interesting things about it. And it's so like in like codifying this new like orchestration book chapter, one of the things that I wanted to codify is like, okay, four big things I think euphonium does really, really well. Play lyrically in a way that will cut through the whole ensemble, almost no matter how many effects you have going on.
Mm,
Two, play active, agile lines cutting through the ensemble almost no matter how much else you have going on. both of which are really kind of special. Blend with everything. So
Mm-hmm.
Hiram Diaz has a really nice analogy for that. One of the things that he says is if you study the euphonium literature, and he said this in a masterclass to a bunch of euphonium players. He said you need to be listening so much because if you study the traditional band literature, euphonium is used to make whatever instrument that's supposed to be prominent more prominent because it
Mm-hmm.
blends with everything. So Sousa would say, need more clarinet here, double in euphonium.
Mm-hmm.
And
Oh,
so if
yeah,
you think
there's a
about
reason why that happens. Oh yeah.
yeah.
Oh yeah.
Yeah. And so if you think about like the composer as more of an audio technician, it's like, I need to boost gain. Well, double in euphonium. And
Absolutely.
then,
Well, it's that conical design and its ability
yeah,
to project. And
yes,
I mean, there are times, of course, in certain ranges where the euphonium can be maybe a little too poofy, and we got to like
certainly.
strategize about ways to make it work. But just with the way it's designed, yeah, I hearing your list, I was like,
Yeah.
yes,
And,
yes, yes,
and,
yes.
and so like, I actually wanted to keep this next one separate, even though it feeds very much into the last one, which is double the horn an octave below, double the tubas an octave up, or in some cases, double the horns at pitch, because like those
Mhm.
having an extension of the conical brass family, I actually think is really really important. Also, not enough composers think about the wind ensemble as being like 80 chamber groups that happen to function as a bigger organism.
Mhm.
The only composer I've really seen do this super effectively remotely recently, in my opinion, is David Maslanka.
Okay.
Because I mean, like David would be unafraid to be like, yeah, you know what this section is? It's a duet between like fourth horn and clarinet two. Let's make it
Because why
happen.
not? Yeah, why
Yeah.
not?
Well, he would have he'd probably have like a whole list of reasons and say like I meditated and St. Francis was like telling me to do this, which I mean in his own esoteric way I think is very powerful. Like I'd love to know what it's like to have that like connection to the universe, to have like that conviction for that kind of decision.
Right. And yeah,
But like I've never
absolutely.
felt something like that. It'd be incredible. But yeah, so having those two, so you can have kind of like this horn euphonium quartet or this tuba euphonium quartet is as a member of the wind ensemble, and then the underrated one, in my opinion, uh, an active bass line that is rounded and higher pitched when using tuba or bass trombone would not be effective.
Okay.
Not something I think people think of, but something I think the euphonium could do really well in the right context. Probably something you see more in the brass band land.
Yeah, brass band land or the other like band composer that comes to mind, maybe like some Granger. Um,
Yeah,
maybe.
yeah, I think so. I mean, like his use of euphonium is so interesting, especially because like this comes to mind because I was actually probably with one of your former teachers. You were at Northwestern with Mallory Thompson, right?
Hmm.
I spent the Friday afternoon playing for her conducting symposium here at Illinois. It was wonderful, and I'm like,
Ooh, fun.
what a serious treat. I would
Yeah.
watch her teach for forever. It was so fun.
Oh yes.
Um, but we were playing a lot of Lincolnshire 2 and Lincolnshire 5 in that ensemble, and one of the things that came to mind a lot was um, the TA had forgotten to print off the baritone part for me. So
Yeah.
I'm trying to like I mean, for a lot of it, I was playing what was on the page, but the fifth time through movement five, I'm like, okay, I'm just gonna try to guess. Like, I have the solo in cues, but I'm gonna guess what the actual notes are and try to play it by ear.
Hmm.
and
Here we
and
go.
what I figured out was a lot of it's just parallel fifths, which is pretty nice. But like, uh, one of the things I noticed a lot is he, especially because he was writing for a section that had baritone and euphonium, he would use euphonium primarily as like, okay, this is what's going to double tubas, be the lower bass line when tuba would be too much, and then first euphonium is the one that's got all the cutting solos and all of the woodwind boosting stuff. So
Hmm.
using two players to fulfill both roles at the same time, incredibly underrated, especially given that like most euphonium parts now are probably just the second part of that pair.
Yeah. Oh, Granger. I'd have to do another deep dive and look at other examples. I played Lincolnshire Posey. I mean, no joke, approaching 50 times. In
Yeah, me too.
total. And I was like, oh, I'm really familiar, but on the spot, I'm forgetting what's going on around
Yeah.
me. Um, yeah, clever stuff.
Yeah,
Uh,
that piece is so interesting. My girlfriend and I were talking about this morning. It's like how Leadership Posey is. in a really weird way, kind of like music journalism.
How do you
Because,
mean?
like, well, so he's traveling around England collecting all of these folk songs and telling all of the stories of the people that live there
Hmm.
as music, which is like, who else is like really did that tons? I mean, like, people use folk songs, but not in like this kind of codified musicological way. And then he's trying to like I think about the solo in movement too, where there's the snare drum roll, and that's supposed to mimic the like the static on the phonograph that he recorded this song with. And it's like, who would think of that? Like, it's such an
Or
interesting sound and it's so incredible.
you look at like Rufford Park Poachers and like, gosh,
Yeah.
why is this meter changing all the time? It's because that's what the person did when they sang it. So
Yeah.
that
Yeah,
he
or
was,
even Lord
he was
Melbourne. See,
right.
like, you're gonna beat time for every beat just to like, it can be so crazy and wild. It's like, but somehow it's like extraordinarily effective.
Yeah.
And
Oh
it's
yeah.
kind of cool
Oh,
that way.
hmm. Gosh, I'll do a listen of that sometime. I After this is over, I think I'm doing like some cleaning
Oh,
and
nice.
some chores. So I'll put the earbuds in and maybe listen to Lincolnshire Posy.
Nice.
I don't
Yeah,
know. I
always
don't
a
know
good
who else
time.
will be doing that while they clean their house, but I will.
Yeah, I love a good listen while I clean up. I find it's a great way to pass the time, and it makes cleaning not so arduous.
Yes. Ding ding.
So, I understand that you teach a class on film music.
Yes.
Can you talk about
Yes.
that? That sounds fascinating.
Well, okay. So for oh gosh, the first time it was taught was back in 2017. And before that, I was doing Tuba Euphonium Studio and I had this music appreciation class. And I was just kind of like, maybe there's something else out there that I could bring that's new and would be exciting um, to some students. And so I started thinking, what about a class on like movie music? So like
Yeah.
it's aimed at the general campus student. We don't write music or
Yeah.
anything like that. It's like a film music appreciation class. But it's I I really like how it ended up taking form. The first unit is on like the history of some forms of entertainment that were happening right before the advent of film, and then
Whoa,
the
that's
silent
cool.
film. Yeah, well, there were all sorts of things
Yeah.
leading up to it, and then with the
Well, and
advent
that
of the
makes sense because,
camera.
like, if you're going to teach a class right, you have to start with the roots.
Mhm. Well, and providing context, like so many students are like, "Oh, so that's what that meant," or "Oh," you just see all the light bulbs going on. So
Yeah.
I felt I gained a deeper conviction of like keeping some of that earlier stuff. Yeah, and then silent film era, and then that didn't last terribly long because then in like 1927 with the jazz singer, someone did an ad lib spoken line. It's like, well, silent film era is over, and I just take the class kind of through. It's kind of grouped by decades because they share similar traits, and then the textbook ends, I think, in like 2017, and so
Huh.
um, like to make it current and relevant because I think the students appreciate that their final project is on a film that won the Academy Award for best score, and often people choose one that won the accolade within the past like 2 or 3 years. So I
Mhm.
predict this semester I'm going to get a lot of oh god, what one? Soul. I'll get a lot of Soul and what
Did
Dune?
Dune,
Dune?
Dune's
Yeah.
oh, have you seen the video of Hans Zimmer talking about the Dune soundtrack?
Hmm.
Oh man. Okay, so for the listeners,
Been a while though.
you gotta go watch this. You gotta go watch this video. It's incredible. He talks about how like how weird it is that sci-fi scores are always Western orchestral music and how that doesn't make any sense. And so his philosophy was, what if we invented an orchestra based on an instrument that could reasonably be made on another planet?
Hmm.
And I was like, that's the most genius thing I've ever heard in my life. Like
A lot of
that's
thought.
real art. Like that's
Hmm.
real art. Well, because one of the things I've been a little frustrated with, I mean, post I guess 2010, a little bit Avengers because I think they're harkening more to something a little more like Wagnerian, like Gesamtkunstwerk style especially with all these huge movies and like everything is star studded and it's like best costume. Like we have all this money. Like the Russo brothers are running everything. We've got the best composers in the business. Like all of this stuff. Like I think that's a bit of an exception to the rule, but um, in the grand scheme of things, like film music has kind of gotten more vibe than melodic driven.
Mm.
And so that's just my opinion. I mean, like you see a couple of glittering jewels every once in a while. How to Train Your Dragon comes to mind, but like I think for a genre like fantasy where it's so tied into it, like that makes a lot of sense. Um, but especially with like, I mean, stuff like John Wick. I mean, like newer action movies, even some like rom com movies. It's very like vibey kind of music, more so than it is like something that's super melodically driven.
Yeah,
Um,
well, and so much of the tradition was, borrowed from, Wagner and the use of
yeah,
leitmotifs. And
yeah.
they are intentionally connected to a, person, place, thing, or idea. And, sometimes that works beautifully. John Williams, hello, he figured that
Yeah,
out. And
and
other
the thing
times,
I think it's
maybe
really
it's not appropriate.
interesting that the idiom has departed from that as like an artistic statement and like not necessarily saying it's good or bad, but just it fascinates me in just thinking like why they might have made some of those artistic choices. And it
Hmm.
strikes me as something where like something in Avengers, you can really like use the Avengers theme to like help tell a story or like signify that bigger moments are happening.
Hmm. Well, and I'd be remiss if I didn't point out what one of the assignments I have in my film music class is deconstructing some criticism that John Williams received. Canby was the critic, maybe
Mhm.
New York Times. Canby was like, I, isn't it all kind of starting to sound the same? Like, is he
Mhm.
really all that good? But it also speaks to, well, if it ain't broke, don't fix it.
Yeah.
So
Well,
it depends on how
and
you want to pick it apart, right?
and I think that's incredibly cruel to John Williams because they're looking exclusively at a series that is interconnected with itself. And so like that's so much more unfair than saying like let's look at Star Wars versus Superman versus ET versus Jaws versus Indiana Jones. And I mean that pantheon alone, you're talking about some of the most classic films in American history.
Yeah. Well, and then like, what's wrong with the composer having a style or having a sound?
Yeah, you know that's
Why is that
I
wrong?
I had that talk with a
Mhm.
classmate earlier this semester. We were playing Michael Dougherty's Bells for Stokowski, which exhilarating piece of music, and they were like, Andrew, do you think Michael Dougherty's music all sounds the same? A couple of us were talking about that earlier, and I was like, couldn't you make the case that a lot of Beethoven sounds the same?
Just saying.
When I
But
listen to a Beethoven piano concerto, I usually know it's a piano or piano sonata. I know it's a Beethoven piano sonata, even if I don't know which one it is. If I hear a Beethoven symphony, those I usually can guess. Well, if it's 3, 5, 7, 3, 5, 6, 7, or 9, I know which one it is. But if it's but if it's outside of those, I'm usually like that sounds like Beethoven.
yeah, exactly, exactly. One, he has a sound that's revered and
Yeah.
elevated. That's the model.
Yeah, and it's
But
I
why
almost
though?
yeah, I think personally, I'm kind of the opinion that like the promised land for a composer should be like where you have that, but then you can write some stuff that's so outside of it that people go, "No way, that's by John Williams."
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, that's
I think
cool.
yeah, I think that'd be special. But so something I'm curious about. So with this film music class, like um in as far as like modern films go, which ones do y'all talk about? Like I guess post 2000.
Oh, oh. Give me a minute since I am on a computer. I'll pull this up. Um, where was the? I have a list here. Sorry, opening up a PDF on the cloud. So, like, past 2000. Ooh, I know. Stuff's coming to mind. Let's see. Oh, Lord of the Rings. Yes.
Yeah, that's a good
Avatar,
one.
Interstellar, Skyfall, Sherlock Holmes, A Game of Shadows, Up, Moulin Rouge, Gravity, um, Wally, The Queen. Because here's the other thing about the class is that where the textbook um, I don't want to say like falls short, but where just in the interest of time, like we have to keep chugging along to get
Oh,
over
sure.
some friends. I assign them these projects I call screening reports, and
Hmm.
so they do 5 of them throughout the semester where I assign them a clip and give them the setting and all this type of stuff, and I ask them leading questions about the music itself and then its function and its overall impact. So that
Hmm.
helps me get across or talk about different films as well. So I have like Catch Me If You Can, Apollo
Oh,
13,
cool.
the first Harry Potter movie, The Queen, and Wally are those 5 assignments, and it just makes them synthesize everything rather than just feeling like they have to regurgitate information on an exam. We try
Yeah.
to have as open-ended as possible, but yeah, I, the number of times I get on course evaluations, like I really enjoyed those screening reports. What? Like students go out of their way to say they enjoyed an assignment? It
Yeah.
might surprise you. So I'm
It's
gonna run with that for as long as I can.
Yeah,
We'll
I find
see.
it so funny. So last, not fall of this year, but fall of my first year of graduate school, so fall 2021, I got a teaching assistantship teaching a cultural analysis of German folklore, focusing on the Grimm's fairy tales, and like one wild class. Not
Okay.
something I thought I was prepared for. But what I found is, um, you can be an extraordinarily effective teacher by just asking, why would someone make this? And then continuing to ask the question, why?
Mhm. Sure. Give it a whirl.
And it was really cool. And one of the things I found in running that class was like trying to like I think too much of higher education has gotten away from like a seriously in-depth philosophical discussion, which is a time I think students really figure out like not only how to think, but understanding themselves and what they think.
Hmm.
And I think missing that is like, I think that's part of the reason a lot of young people are starting to get frustrated with college.
Yeah. Well, a lot of what I notice is when you have these large enrollment classes,
Yeah.
people will not speak in them. Like, I
Yeah.
cannot stand up in front of a room of 250 people and say, "Give me your thoughts on this vulnerable topic."
Hmm.
Sure, like no, it's not going to happen. But
Yeah.
unfortunately, there's this mechanism in place where oh, tuition dollar generation, oh, money makes things happen. So let's
Yeah.
have these large enrollment classes. Whereas I feel like I'm about to experience some change here in the fall of 2023. I'll have my first offering of my new LGBTQ plus perspectives in music class,
Oh,
and
awesome.
I designed it intentionally to be no more than 30 people. And
Yeah,
the
it's got to be. It's got to be small enough where you can have an interesting conversation, and like
yeah.
small enough where you can reasonably tell if everybody's actually participating.
Well, and I want you to dive in,
Yeah,
and people aren't going to want to engage with me on these kind of vulnerable, sensitive topics, focusing on identity and expression and whatnot. If it's a group of 75 to 100, yeah, no, people aren't going to open up.
seriously.
But I'm going to run with this, and this is my experiment. Like, let's try to keep
That's
it
awesome.
around
That actually
30.
gets to another question I had for you is like, how has advocacy taken on a different role in your career over the last couple of years? I
Ooh,
mean,
that's a good
because
question.
like, I mean, you're a prominent speaker about advocacy at one of the largest music education clinics in the country, in the Midwest Band Clinic this year, which is
Yeah.
like a serious accolade.
Um, well, honestly, for a while, I I I knew I wanted to do that work, but I didn't know how it could look. I mean, because there's
Yeah.
no how-to guide,
Oh, of
right?
course. I mean, like,
And
you're actually on the frontier.
yeah, and I was starting to think, well, okay, Chris, maybe it can be what you want it to be. And actually, my husband is the director of WSU's LGBTQ Center,
Oh,
so
wow.
I started to observe a lot of the work that he was doing, and especially from the advocacy angle. And then I, look around the Tuba Euphonium community. I'm like, well, there aren't a lot of people like me, but I know we're out there, and
Yeah.
I just think this matters. I will die on this hill. This type of advocacy and inclusion is incredibly important because, you know, as I said at Midwest, it's like some of the things that people can implement to
Hmm.
be more inclusive of LGBTQ folks could actually save lives. I mean,
I think so too.
there there are queer folks out there who are